It's betting, Jim, but not as we know it.
How dare you? Are you just talking to yourself?
It is 21 minutes to 2 p.m. on Thursday, the 23rd of November, 2023. And you are listening to the BashCast. Coming up in this afternoon's BashCast, we are joined by Jon Roberts from Predictology. The data service officially ranked one spot higher than bookie bashing in the best data resource category at the 2023 SBC Betting Awards. That may make them our sworn enemies, but as the saying goes, gaslight all your friends and keep your enemies closer. In this episode, we discuss I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, the skill sets for beating the markets, logistics of reliable odds collection, modelling football, historical trending, pre-match versus in-play edges, and the all-important 2023 BashCast Christmas Quiz. You may have thought that you'd already heard BashCast episode 211. I am here to gaslight you by telling you, no you haven't. This is BashCast episode 211. So we're going to be joined this week by Jon Roberts over at Predictology, so we can have a chat with somebody. It's not just me rambling on, as usual. Are you there, Jon?
I am indeed, Tom. Great to be here, and looking forward to our chat today.
But where is here?
Well, very good question. Here is, at this moment in time, Manila in the Philippines.
In the
Not
Philippines?
Usual location, I don't believe.
Yeah, no, crikey. I've never been there, but I would love to visit.
Well, you're welcome anytime.
There's a thing going on just now over in the UK. And obviously, you're in the Philippines. I very much doubt you watch I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here.
I can't say I've watched that in a number of years.
Have you been following the story that's happened there this week?
I wish I had, but I have no idea.
Right, so I don't know if this is just me, and this is why I want to ask you.
Yeah.
Because I've been at home with the kids all day and I haven't been able to talk to any other grown-ups, so I want somebody else's opinion. There's this lady on I'm a Celebrity, which is closer to you because they're in Australia in the jungle than it is to me, right?
Yeah.
And her name is Nella Rose. Have you heard of Nella Rose?
I have not. I'm not doing very well,
No.
am I?
Me neither, though. Don't worry about that. She is a 26-year-old social media TikTok influencer who talks about beauty products. So you get a pass for not knowing who she is.
Yeah, you've already said probably about 5 of my least favourite words in one sentence there, I think.
Right. I definitely feel like I'm out of touch already. But okay, obviously, because she's in I'm a Celebrity, the youth know about her, and she's not my demographic as a middle-aged man. In fact, she's probably the opposite. But anyway, she's in the jungle, and I saw a video that was posted where she got into a little bit of an argument. And the argument was with another chap who's called Fred Sirieux, who I think is like a chef. He's a French guy. He's 51 years old. I think he's on a TV program called something to do with dating in the UK. Another person I don't know, but he comes across quite well. He's a little bit more my demographic, a little bit closer to my age. And they're just having a chat with each other. And he says he's a little bit older than her because he's 51 and she's 26. She says, well, you're not that old. And he goes, come on, I'm 51. You're 26. I'm old enough to be your dad, right? That's the phrase he used. I'm old enough to be your dad. Now, there is a little bit of background to her. She has lost her dad. A lot of people have lost their parents. Maybe it's a little bit raw, but she gets a little bit in a huff with the phrase, I'm old enough to be your dad. And the
Right.
next day he comes up to her and wants to give her some food, and she's not talking to him. And he sort of drills out to, why aren't you speaking to me? And she turns around and says, we're not friends. You and me are not friends. You said you're old enough to be my dad. You're belittling me. I've lost my dad. You're really insensitive. That's an abusive thing for you to say. I don't want to eat your food. I don't want to be your friend. We are not mates. You are a middle-aged man who's got nothing to do with me. You stay over in that side of the camp. I'm going to stay over in this side of the camp. And the reason this is kind of blown up is because I think it's showing a generational divide between maybe people. I don't know how old are you? Can I ask, John? Do you mind?
Yeah, 44.
Yeah, you're my age, right? So I'm 45, you're 44, he's 51. A generational divide between people who have come through a period of time where victim mentality wasn't a thing, I don't think. At least if it was, I didn't see it. To this girl who perhaps she is a little bit raw at the passing of her dad, but also she's desperate to be the victim in this case. Can you sympathize at all with the fact that people like this are coming through as a different generation and we're the dinosaurs, or do you have any opinion on it whatsoever?
Well, you thrown me the grenade there, haven't you?
I have, yeah. What is going on?
So I probably in about 10 minutes' time I'll be cancelled. I guess that's what happens these days, isn't it? Well, speaking from someone who lost their own father at 23, so not too far off their demographic, I can see no way of relating or empathizing to that kind of a reaction. I think it's two very independent things. You know, a young lady talking to an older man, he's sort of just. So it feels like he's just sort of sitting where his line is. You know, he's not looking at her in any other way than being, I'm much older than you. Whereas she somehow twisted that to be related to an entirely different personal matter. And yeah, I think it feels very much about woe is me and attention seeking, I think. And I don't want to belittle, the personal challenges that she may have faced, but I don't see the relevance to it in this scenario whatsoever.
It's interesting you say that. I think I do want to belittle it because I think it should be called out. And I was wondering why I would do in that position. Like, do you turn to her and go, oh my God, you need to take some personal responsibility and grow up here? Because if you are going to consider, he did literally say, I am terribly sorry if I've offended you. But those words alone, I mean, of course, he's in a jungle and there are cameras on him. But those words alone almost allow him to say, oh, well, if you've been offended by something I didn't mean to do, I'm so sorry about it. Whereas I'm like, maybe you just go, oh, you need to shut up and get over this.
Look,
you're right,
I think
though. I mean, you can't use... Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, look, I mean, I think if the question that you posed to me was, how would I respond in that situation? And it would be much more in line with what you just sort of painted there. I would just call a spade pretty much on it and be like, what are you on about?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, like, with my daughter growing up, it's something I've got to sort of drill into her. It's like, if you're just going to carry around the fact that people deserve to give you attention because you're offended, then you're not the stronger person coming through life. I had a friend of 20 years who this year has been going through a bit of a tough time herself. She's lost someone very close to her. She has a little bit of a difficult family life. And she accused me of gaslighting her. And this hurt me very much. One, because I had to look up what gaslighting meant in the dictionary. And two, I have to look at my own behavior, because perhaps you can treat people in a way and you don't recognize you're doing it. And perhaps the generation before us, I think, are very much set in their ways, whereas like it's my way or the highway. And I think I can be a little bit compassionate about, if I've made a mistake, I want to recognize the mistake that I've made so that I can rectify it for you. Something very good in the poker table. People that lose on the poker table tend to get very emotional and think, that guy made the worst call I've ever seen and I've lost money. Whereas the mentality should be, that guy made the worst call ever and I lost money, but I'm glad he did it because it was positive EV for me in the long run. So it's two different ways to look at it. And if you are capable of looking inside you and saying, I've made a mistake, But also, if you look inside you and say, I didn't make a mistake, it's important for you to call the person out on that. And that's what I've wanted to do, saying, I don't think I did gaslight you. I think you're in a place that's really, really bad just now, and I sympathize with it. That's, of course, my friend of 20 years. I'm not a friend of Nella Rose's, but I'm not into beauty on TikTok. So,
and I think that's something that's a big difference between IQ and EQ, so emotional intelligence. And I think that's something the generation that we're referring to here doesn't really have. And if I go back to my days of working in agencies and corporates, you deal with people in different backgrounds, different personalities, different generational things. But and as a manager, you have to be able to adapt and get the best from people. But what this generation, it's interesting. And so when I was last week, I was in Thailand seeing a friend and doing a little bit of work with one of our developers, and we went out for dinner, and there was a lad there who was, what would I say, somewhere between 28 and 30, so probably still in this gap that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And he
so a latter end of Generation X.
Yeah. And as the evening progresses, his personality and his behavior became all the more, I don't want to say offensive, but actually I will say offensive, because by the end of the evening, a few pints in, he said some incredibly offensive things, which I will not repeat here, but it was so belligerent and generalized and so factually incorrect. It was sort
Is
of
this about, was he talking about sort of his views on society as a whole, or views on older people, or views of people in the office that were
it was basically a catch-all description of all expat children and what their parental family scenario was. Let's put it like that. So
high risk subject, by the way. Very easy to offend people for real in that, because I can imagine expats go abroad and they're like, have I done the best for my children? So you've got to be careful in that area.
Yes. So he was sitting around a table with 3 expats, all married with children, and was basically describing us. And what made it even worse, and which shows this lack of self-awareness that this generation has, he himself is an expat child. So he had a Thai mother and a British father. So he was effectively describing himself while describing it in a way that was supposed to be derogatory to, well, basically anybody.
It's a lack of personal awareness a little bit, isn't it?
And what I'll say is, like, leading up to this point, it was sort of in and out of the conversation, but he was also at the same time, while we're drinking, eating dinner, having conversation, playing a computer game on his iPad.
Oh, I can't stand it. I cannot stand it. I can't. Honestly, that's my biggest bugbear in the whole world. And I mean, did you call him up on that?
We did, and then he proceeded to sort of say, I mean, there's a 30-year-old man who still regularly borrows money from his father because he can't make his salary last, and just all of these things. And I'm like, younger than you, I'd moved to Australia already. At your age, I was running a team of 20-odd people. And I'm like, you're 30 years old and you're still playing your iPad at dinner. It's very hard to relate.
Yeah, he'll look at you and go, yeah, but you're a boomer granddad and you got all your wealth from property.
I wish.
From property.
I wish.
Yeah, I was over in Bali, not too far from the Philippines, and I was playing a golf tournament with my 3 buddies I went to university with, so all the same age. And we went down to the local cafe, and there were 4 or 6 Australian kids there, all around about 19 to 22. They had the benefit of the beauty of youth. I mean, they were just naturally fit, tanned, and they were all sat around the table, and they were all 6 of them on some sort of Snapchatty, Instagrammy thing, and they didn't say a word to each other. And I have a rule. I will bring a little bag with me to any pub or dinner, and I will invite everyone just to put their mobile phone into that, and we'll put it under the table. I mean, this is glorious for any thieves that are around that want to track where I'm going on a Friday night. But you sort of, I know it sounds supercilious, but it's so easy for, I think, the younger generation and the older generation, and my parents as well, to arrive at the pub, phone straight out, check in on Facebook, let everyone know what you're doing. It's like, Mum, I haven't seen you in about 3 weeks. Can you put that away and we can actually have a decent conversation? And with my parents, I think that generation, it's also new to them, that it brings a comfort blanket. And with the younger generation than us, it's what they've always known, but I blame the parents because the parents have taken them to the pub when they were 10 years old. And instead of trying to have a conversation with them, they've had an easy life and put an iPad in front of them. So now they get to, well, this guy's 27, did you say, though? Yeah, that's a little bit old for that.
I think
though.
it was closer to 30. It may even have been 30. But it's interesting you bring that up. But like, I've got a friend who runs a couple of hostels in Australia. And this was like 5 years ago he's saying this. But I don't know if you ever went backpacking, Tom, but like one of those.
I went backpacking in Australia, albeit 22 years ago. So yeah,
it's a while for me as well. But the whole the benefit of that is one, you get to see all these amazing places, but two is the people you meet along the way, right? So you check into the hostel, you go into that communal area, and you get to know people. Yeah. Whereas these days in the hostels, they're full. But nobody's talking to each other. They're all talking to their friends or their online friends. So it feels like they're missing such a large piece of the emotional development and benefits of traveling like that by just talking to people already instead of the people around you.
One of the memories I have of traveling is the fact that I felt so distant, so far away. I mean, obviously not just geographically, Australia and the UK, but because I wasn't carrying around a mobile phone that was connected to the internet, and Facebook wasn't a thing, and Instagram wasn't a thing, and we back in 2001 we kept in touch via email. But even then, I remember I had to go to an internet cafe to access the email to send to people. So when I would check into these hostels, you're absolutely right. Your only real option is to walk up to people and say hello, or sit down and read a book. But there's no browsing on the internet and everything like that. And it's an uncomfortable thing to do because it takes a little bit of confidence. And I can definitely see that if it was me doing it now, I'd walk in and because I'd feel a little bit uncomfortable, I'd maybe sit down and get my phone out and start scrolling on it. And that means that you're not making that effort. I'll tell you.
No,
sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, getting out of your comfort zone is so important in life. And whether that is traveling, work, sporting events, betting, all of those things. A very good friend of mine who gave, I don't know where he got these words of wisdom because he wasn't his normal repartee, but he said to me when I was like 19, he's like, to be successful in life, never be 100% comfortable. Always have a little bit of you that's still pushing you on, challenging you. So aim for 80 to 90% comfort. You're succeeding. Keep that little bit, that little thorn somewhere that keeps pushing you forward.
Yeah, that's very good advice. Because if you're always making yourself comfortable, then you're never probably actually driving to explore new experiences and ideas. That's the thing.
You stop challenging yourself. You stop moving. So eventually,
and then you become Gary from accounts. Grey Gary from accounts.
Indeed, everybody knows Grey Gary.
A quick gambling story before we start. I recognise we're 17 minutes in, and I've just said the words before we start, but we're still this is part of the podcast. When I was traveling in Australia, I have a gambling success story, a negative EV gambling success story. I was in Adelaide and I was at Mulga's hostel, and Mulga was a terrible human being. He really was. He was awful. He was a drunken, overweight, balding, mid-50s Australian man who was very angry at life and seemed to despise his customer base. He didn't like backpackers, but he owned Mulga's backpacking hostel. He had a girlfriend who was maybe 21 and she was from, I'm going to say Vietnam. It could have been any of the countries around that area of Southeast Asia. And he was abusive towards her. We saw him be verbally abusive to her. We have no doubt he was probably physically abusive towards her as well. And I was very much stuck in a rut because I had no money in the bank and I was working picking grapes at one of the red wine fields, which is horrendous slave labor. And I just about earned enough to pay my rent and my travel to the job. And that was it. So I was stuck in a cycle. I couldn't get out. I wanted to get north to Alice Springs. And I was working with these Danish guys and we were telling this Vietnamese girl, we're going to break you out of here one day. We just need to come up with a plan. So one day I come back from the fruit picking. It's Friday night. You get your weekly wages. And the Danish guy in front of me is being paid out. And the guy paying him his wages goes 100, 200, 210, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. Except he's given him 8 $100 notes. He hasn't switched from the hundreds to the tens. So he's giving him like 800 instead of 200. And I'm getting paid the same amount. And I go up and he goes 100, 200, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. But he's giving me 800. And I'm like, this is the opportunity. We needed about 1,500 to get out and get north to Alice Springs. The 260 I was earning every week was just paying for my rent and my travel. So I was never getting to 1,500. I was stuck. So I was halfway there. So before he could notice, we bolted out of the door and we went down to the local casino and we all just put all of our wages for that week on red to see if we could double it up. And red came in. And then we went on the beers for the rest of the day, which is not something we'd done when we were there. And we got back quite late and we woke up the Vietnamese girl and we were like, tonight is the night. And we packed up all of our stuff, jumped over the fence at the back, jumped into the front seat of the Danish guy's car. I think one of the Danish guys wasn't drinking. He hadn't been drinking all night. And then we just drove north like that. And then everything got better when we got to Alice Springs. And I could still be stuck at Mulger's hostel today if that red hadn't come in. But it was, minus 1.5% EV, that bet.
That's
it was
brilliant.
just one of those that needed to come in.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I think it's been a long time since anyone said it got better once we got to Alice Springs, but that's a whole political conversation we won't get into right now.
That's how bad Mulger's hostel was. So, John, you run Predictology. Can you give me a little bit of your background and how Predictology came about?
Yeah, sure. So beginning with that. So I think I got so I'm not one. I don't know what your background is, Tom, when you originally came into betting, but I'm not someone that grew up with, a bookmaker uncle, or my dad was always into the races. Betting just wasn't a thing in our household. Maybe did the pools occasionally. And it's only when I got into my early 20s and sort of fell into digital marketing. It was one of the first search agencies in the UK. It was, it was a lot of numbers, a lot of spreadsheets, all stuff I enjoyed and found fascinating. And it was around about exactly the same time that I discovered a website called Adrian Massey. I don't know if you remember that one.
I don't, but I heard you and Pete talk very favorably about it on the SBC podcast.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a wonderful site, very basic, very early 2000s type of website. But
what did it do?
It just had wealth, lines and lines of horse racing data. So you could go in there and just put some filters on, and it would spit out this long list of results, and you could easily copy paste that into Excel and start sort of trying to see if you can develop a profitable system or a profitable strategy.
Was it like an early time form, just like a lot of data on all the different attributes in horse racing?
Yeah, probably that. Or I think the closest thing to it now is probably Horse Race Base, if you've seen that one. But
I wonder how he collect. I've always wondered how you collect that, especially as a small band, because it's probably an incredible amount of data collection, and the only thing that could be done with automation and scraping, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think it must have been something like that. I mean, it wasn't as in depth as you would get now, like with speed times and ratings and things like that. But it had all like the weights and the tracks and the going and but the key thing I think was it had odds, so you could start looking up if only a 10-runner handicap and it's priced between this and this. Very generic systems that probably work for a short while, then don't. The edge goes away and things like that. But it was for me at that time. It was nothing. I'd never seen anything like it, and I loved playing with the numbers and had some success out of it. But over the years, my career was going well, but on the side, where my real passion was football and trying to make that work. And
what was your career?
I was working in digital marketing, so search engine marketing. Okay. But this is way back when Google was first becoming a thing in that regard. So I worked for one of the first digital agencies for I think 4 years. Sold in 2007.
I know that a few of the digital marketers cleaned up in the early years of Google, like the bell curve of wealth distribution. The guys right at the top made a hell of a lot of money, way more than you could make now in 2023. Would you have sat up at the top end there?
Certainly the companies. I mean, it was a startup, and the company itself sold for 70 million.
That sounds pretty decent to me.
Yeah, and then I mean, taking a diversion in the story, but yeah. So that at that point, I sort of had the foresight that Yeah, it was great working in a company like that. It was very small. It grew very fast because I was one of the first through the doors. You get that experience and exposed to things and those responsibilities you wouldn't get walking into a 100, 200 person company, right? So you kind of sink or swim as you're going along. And when the company sold, I sort of had the foresight to know that the upper management, the people I'd been learning from and aspiring to be, would probably be taking their much larger checks that they banked than the one I did, and moving on to pastures new. So I decided to be out the door before they were out the door. And the more traditional path was to go down to London, and then perhaps after a few years you go to US or Australia. But I decided just to cut out the middleman and went straight to Sydney in 2007, which was probably one of the best things I did, because you're walking into a market that's 2 or 3 years sort of junior to where it's established in the UK. So you're sort of walking in and being a bit of an expert in the market because people are sort of looking to your experience. And I happened to join a great company. There was sort of 4 or 5 of us. We were sort of fourth or fifth largest customer for Google, but within sort of 2-3 years, I'm running that team. We're Google's largest partner. The team's grown to 30-40 people. And we just rode this, amazing period in the early Nord, what do you call it, noughties, early 2010s.
Yeah, the noughties, yeah.
Yeah, and it was just a wonderful experience, wonderful people. You were really at the cutting edge of things, really challenging things, and really sort of following that whole digital market. And it really sort of taught me a lot that I've sort of taken into other things as well.
Now, I heard you say a lot of your gambling skills were honed on the fact that you're pretty nifty around Excel and spreadsheets. Was your work at the digital marketing area something that you were just constantly figuring out how VLOOKUPs work and things like that, or did you just happen to know Excel anyway?
No, it was definitely, it was definitely the former. I was learning skills in the digital space that I was going, all right, learning those formulas, learning to do those things in Excel, and then sort of transitioning that into the hobby side of things, which it was at that time.
I had the sort of same progression there, whereas I worked in engineering consultancy, and whilst we could use other bits of software, everyone at the time could use Excel. I don't know if it's a more of a dying skill set these days. I would absolutely promise you, I am not going into the arena of gambling and advantage play if I don't know how to use Excel. Without Excel, without the ability to quickly arrange data, then the gambling edges don't appear for me. And I know people today ask some rudimentary beginner questions about how do you do various things on Excel. Honestly, I think one of the things anybody could do to sort of kickstart their own analytics is go and learn. If you don't know how to use it, go and learn. The best way that you had to learn and I had to learn was that we needed it for our jobs over a few years. So you kind of have to learn then. But if you don't need it for your job, go and take a course. I think it's paramount, and I think you can't do it without it, because you do need the ability in gambling to be able to interrogate and juggle data around quickly and efficiently.
100%. Yeah. I mean, there's some great courses online, and they really don't cost that much, but it's just one of those life skills. If you have it, you'll always find uses for it. And, even with everything that Predictology can do, I still do my record keeping for my trades and my betting in Excel, and sometimes export some of the data we have from the site, because just certain ways you want to look at the data, it's so much easier in that Excel format than it is necessarily on a website or a database screen. So, having that ability to be able to manipulate that data quickly and easily is really important.
Yeah, for sure. So, how did you progress from the digital marketing in Sydney to Predictology then?
Yeah, so round about, probably went live 2014, but it was probably it's one of those projects. I don't know if this was similar for your project, but in hindsight, I wish I developed it a lot quicker. But it was sort of the time I was sort of doing it, hiring a developer, sort of single developer to build sort of what I wanted, but still having quite a successful career. And when he'd be like, "Oh, this is going to take a bit longer than I thought," you sort of go, "Oh, okay," and then you just forget about it for a week or two, then you come back to it. Sort of instead of how I work now, which is very much full time on it. But the genesis really though was because I was doing so much in Excel, and because I wanted to replicate how the data that was available in horse racing. That sort of was where the genesis came, because you have a lot of what I would call statistical websites for football. The footy stats, the who scored, those types of websites.
Yeah.
And they're great for giving you stats. But I don't know. I've always been of the view that if an insight does not have an action next to it, it's kind of worthless. So what was missing was being able to look at that stat and go, if I can add the pricing to that as well, then I'm starting to come up with an actionable insight, and then we're talking. Now we have something we can test and learn, actually build something from.
This is the thing that Twitter tipsters are very guilty of, that they'll say, well, I've got the bet of the day tonight. It is over 9.5 corners in the Manchester United match. And you look at it and go, okay, but do you? At what odds? And what odds are... Where do I start? What price can I get? And there's the price sensitivity is the second part of the game. You can interrogate and think, well, it's it doesn't matter that it's more than 50% likely that you think something's going to happen. That's completely irrelevant unless you've got a price that you can take that is associated with that probability.
Exactly. I mean, if I just use a digital marketing example, we have a meeting with a client and we say, look, we spent $10,000 this month. We've got 20,000 clicks and we made you 15,000 in sales. Great.
Yeah.
But why? And what's next? And what can we learn from that data?
And is that good or bad?
Exactly.
Because they're just numbers without any benchmarking. Yeah.
Exactly. So, and there just really wasn't anything that was pulling all that together in the football space. So initially, Predictology was purely a historical database. At the time, I think I built up a database of about 200,000 matches. We had about 100 different variables, halftime scores, full-time scores, etc. And we were able to pull in odds for all of those markets, having first off goal markets, second half goal markets, halftime, full-time, Asian handicaps, etc. So you could go in
pull
there.
In those odds in, because that's a really complicated thing to do, to pull in odds in real time, because even 3-hour-old odds are probably useless. And also you want more than one bookmaker. It's such a complicated thing to do. It's the step of the process that many, including me, would fail at, except for kind of in an amateurish way, until I went and sought real kind of IT specialist help for it. How did you solve that problem?
Threw money at the problem. No.
Say that again?
Yeah.
Oh, you threw money at it. Yeah, that's exactly what I did as well today. But
I think
in those beginning days, I was just there, literally just going copy paste with my mouse, over and over again for months and months and months. And it showed the proof of concept worked, but it wasn't a long-term solution.
Totally, yeah. I mean, for in those early days, this website, you couldn't do what I did back then, and I suspect, I don't know whether I should be. No, it's fine. Basically, I think someone might have worked for one of the major bookmakers, and they were selling basically a database at a very reasonable price, going back a period of time. So I bought that, and that's where I did a lot of my internal Excel work. Then I found an XML API feed provider, which again I don't think is still in existence, but they could provide 5 years worth of historical odds and then the live odds going forwards. And we've just improved the partnerships as we go forward. Like you can go to someone like
that's so valuable, right? I mean, yeah. And they charge a fortune, TX odds.
But they charge an absolute fortune. I think it was something like, when I spoke to them last, 50p, or it might even been £1 or £2 per game for the historical data. Now, if you want, we've got 68 leagues and 15 seasons, you do the math at £2. That's getting pretty heavy before we've even talking about the live stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's 96 games in the English league per day, and there's another. I'd say you realistically might want to look at 300 games on a Saturday, and then another 300 during the week. So, what did you say the per game was?
I think it actually was £2 a game.
I mean, you're looking at 1,200 a week. You're in the region of £5,000 a month. It's a lot of money.
Yeah, and that was and if you wanted 15 years worth of that, then again, it goes up. So I suspect I was probably lucky in those early days. We're talking 10 years ago now, that Perhaps some people didn't know the value of what they had, or some didn't really care. They just wanted to sell as much as they could. So I sort of pieced it together from a number of places, but sort of since 2016, 17, we've been pulling in all our own data through various sources and cross-checking it and quality of it. But those early days, you just get hold of what data you can and try and make some use of it and then improve the quality of it over time.
Yeah, and bringing all of that data together, especially the odds, it has its own complexities as well. I mean, I don't know if anybody cares about the behind-the-scenes stuff that has to happen, but you'll have Manchester United over here, Man United over here, Manchester Uttered over here and stuff like that. And then do you have to spend like forever sort of building a library of all the different spellings of all of these teams?
You do, and then it gets even worse because Betfair are terrible because they will just change. Because we're fully integrated with BF Bot Managers, so a lot of our members have a lot of the options for connecting on whatever they're building on our side or using on our side and creating strategies for it to be the bet placement to be done automatically. But Betfair will just change a team ID, not necessarily change the name, but a team ID, and we're using the IDs rather than the team names. I won't tell anyone. And there's no list published anywhere.
Yeah.
So the only way to find it is when you look at your bot the next morning and go, "Oh, why didn't that game place a bet?" And then you send it over to them, and they go, "Oh, that's his why," and we've updated our record, but they can't do anything about it. We can't do anything about it. You can only spot it after the fact, and it's incredibly frustrating.
They did that yesterday for us in the golf. They sent through Brian Easton, who was 400 to 1 to win the golf. But then they changed his ID, and his ID was changed to an existing ID. And all of a sudden, we had we linked him up his place odds with a different player, and we had him at 400 to 1 to win, and 3.5 to come in the top 5. Now, if that existed, it's the bet of the century because you're getting either 3,000 or 30,000 EV on the place part there, but you weren't because it was just linked up wrong, and they can be a nightmare for things. But they'll also do things like in one market they'll call Stoke City, and in another market they'll call it Stoke. And I cannot believe that Betfair don't have their own global list of definitions of teams and players and go, this is the primary name we're calling them. They don't have that. It seems like there's somebody literally typing them out week by week.
Definitely. But I think, when it comes to automation, I'm a big advocate. I've probably been automating stuff in one way, shape, or form for the last 10 years. But you have to accept that if you want things 100%, you have to do it manually. If you're willing, if you're okay with 99% or 98%, automation opens up so many doors. It's just as willing. You just have to be willing. Once in a while, you're going to miss something, but that is just the cost of doing business. Yeah.
Now, talking about doing it manually, I want to move into this now. You've got your databases. And so you're looking backwards at various trends. I heard you say on the SBC podcast an example being how many times if Arsenal lose the previous match, do they win the next match? The bounce back ability and things like that. Now, was that always your sort of structure of your edge? You're looking for historical trends, and you're then trying to see from those historical trends if you can get the benchmarks and odds that you can beat now, that you can get better than? Or were you moving into an area where you were trying to price stuff up yourself on current game coming up in the weekend?
Yeah, so it's a sort of combination. If I go back sort of 5 or 6 years ago, I was probably a lot less sophisticated, and it would be looking at those historical trends, running it through Monte Carlo or an Archie score just to see how confident we can be. These days, it's using an underlying model that's profitable, and that's just a starting point. So we then are looking at our internal ratings, which look at hundreds, thousands of matches with similar profiles. That sort of creates a probability which we can convert into odds. Then we're looking at Pinnacle, and with those the systems, the underlying is profitable, but the most optimal way is then using the historical performance of those systems, using the rating. Is the price better than what we think it should be? And only following those is where the profits, the leverage on those profits goes up significantly.
So if I can, and I completely understand that you've got to, of course, withhold a certain amount of intellectual property because obviously you don't want anyone to clone what you're doing. and we definitely have the same issue over at Bookie Bashing. But if I can ask you, and I'll give you an example of my strategy, a sort of brief or rough outline of how your underlying profitable model works. And I'm just going to throw out ours very quickly just to see how we can, two completely different strategies can sort of both lead to a similar end goal. So with ours, we break everything down into XG, which I know from listening to you previously is a stat that you're not particularly that interested in. From our perspective, it's the number one stat because it's the base from which we start to price almost everything up for both players and for teams. From an XG from each team, we can then use our binomial probability distributions to estimate what is the chances this team's going to score 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up to 20. We know the probability of each team scoring 0 goals to 20 goals, so we can price up the correct score market, and out of the correct score market, we can get everything. We can get the match odds, we can get both teams to win and both team to win and both teams to score, Asian handicaps, and it's just a summation of the different score lines up to 2020, which should be good enough unless you're looking at women's international football. Perhaps there's a couple of games where 2020 is still statistically relevant, but everything's based on that, even our player XG, because we know the team XG, the player XG is a function of that. Like we got 10 outfield players on the pitch. Who's going to score what percentage of goals based on the fact that Man City are getting 2 goals in the game? Is Haaland getting 30% of them? Is he getting 40% of them? Based on that, what's the probability of getting anytime goal scorer, first goal scorer, 2+, 3+? That's the underlying model that we use. For your underlying profitable model, what strategy did you go for?
Yeah, I think we're sort of, I think when we first spoke, we're sort of coming at the same objective, but from different sides. So I think we're using a lot more historical odds as our starting point, and then looking at sort of trends within that. So what I'm ideally looking for is trying to sort of get to 0 in a first instance. So we've got we've got literally hundreds of different filters which we can apply to any model to look at, certain teams that perform, what's their average points per game? How often do they go over or under 2.5 over whatever set period you want to put it in? Any number of things we can do. But what you're looking for really then is sort of over a 5 to 10 year period, would that be profitable at an average price in the market? Because we show odds as sort of like the best odds, the average odds, which is taking our bookmakers and averaging it out. So I always think if you can get to somewhere that has the foundations of a profitable model. Obviously, we don't know that that's going to continue into the future. Edges get changed or forms have changed, but
we get an extra 10 minutes of injury time, which has an effect on the number of expected goals we have in a match. Things like that.
Well, that's an interesting point. I want to come back to that one too in a second. But so what I'm effectively doing there is getting that baseline, and then we're trying to see is okay, what are the markers that we can find within there that were the profitable markers within there versus the ones that we're losing. And so I always think it's much easier to go from 0 to a positive return than it is to try and turn a negative return into a positive return, if you know what I mean. So what we're looking in there, so then we start looking at the ratings, then we start looking at the pricing, and then we look at what's the average performance within this data set. So if there's been 2,000 matches and we know 50% of the time, so if we're getting an average, if we focus on the ones that are 2.1 and higher within that, what kind of impact does that have? And just start playing with different levers, and then we still use a lot of Pinnacle odds because for obvious reasons with them being so sharp. So if we're able to use our models and still find a price that's beating Pinnacle and can reasonably get on, that's where we're sort of trying to find an edge for what we do. If that makes sense.
Do you use a lot of statistical analysis in that like p-values or r-squared fit values where you almost need a statistical confidence looking at the data, and sometimes you might be able to find some sort of trend, but the statistical confidence isn't enough. It doesn't reach a threshold where it's relevant enough for you.
Correct. Yeah. So, but like something within the system builder, so if a user is using that, there's an option where they can look at more extended analysis. So built within that, it's sort of got a 5-star rating, but it's using exactly those Archie scores, p-values, number of bets within that data sample to give you a sort of a semi-confidence filter. But that same thing's also happening automatically on our backend through our full database where the ratings are coming from as well. So it's used on both sides.
Have you ever done an analysis of return on investment or performance on the low confidence analyses against your high confidence analyses, or is that not something you've looked at?
I haven't. I think it's something I'd like to explore, but it's not something I've looked at this stage. Yeah.
Strangely, we did an analysis over that, so we have the same thing. We have. Although from ours, because we're not trending, it's more the confidence in the data source, because a highly liquid Betfair market would be an example of a very the highest confidence that we could have on a data source. And then if we are building something up from a probability distribution on very minimal data ourselves, and then it would be a low confidence data source. And yet somehow some of our lower confidence data source analyses are outperforming the higher confidence ones. I often think it's because maybe these are markets that are a little bit less liquid, and therefore they provide a little bit more opportunity for swinging prices. You can get a little bit of higher EV on things like that. Now, a question I definitely want to ask you, which I've been thinking for the last 5 minutes as you've been talking about this, is how does it work? Let's say I'm looking at Man City playing Liverpool, I think, on the weekend, right?
They are.
So, so I'm looking at Man City over the last 2,000 matches, and that might take me all the way back to 2013. When Manchester City played Newcastle United in 2013, is that game in any way relevant to what happens with Manchester City against Liverpool on Sunday?
I think that's a great question, and I would say very little on an individual basis. There's a couple of things that I generally sort of say with members. So, firstly, I think it's fine to look at a model over a 5-10 year period to see is it something, if it's consistent and it's working. If you're seeing big swings from one year to the next, then that's probably not something that's going to be viable. But if you were looking at how Liverpool Man City got on in 2013, I don't think that has any real impact on today. But if you're looking at the profile of that game in terms of strengths of teams, how they were rated, what their ELO scores were at that time, what their average points are at this point, what their average goals scored, average goals conceded, and look at hundreds of other games of similar stature, then that data can feed into a bigger data set and have value. But will it help you pick the winner on this weekend? Not on a game by game basis, no. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I would imagine that it's the sort of thing where the further you go back, the less relevant it becomes. But there's still some relevancy, and so there's maybe perhaps a weighting that can be applied over time. You go once we're back in 1966, it's 0, and if it's last weekend, it's at its maximum. But
yeah, look, I think there's and I agree. I think judging on a head-to-head 10-year record, no relevance. But at the same time, football doesn't change significantly. What I mean by that, the average for a goal in the first half, pretty much in any league across the globe, is around about 1.15, 1.6.
Yeah.
And the second half is about 1.5, 1.55. That very rarely...
You get outliers in French League 2 who are down in the 0 points, and then you get another outlier in the Dutch Eerste division, which, up at 1.7. But generally, and there's not massive swings in the Premier League, La Liga, MLS, things like that.
So football itself doesn't change too much. So you're looking at the characteristics outside of that. And I think that's where those 10-year trends or databases with 10, 15 years worth of matches in, on a big data perspective, that helps a lot. Does it help you on an individual game basis? Not so much. It depends what the objective is for using that data.
Yeah.
And I've just remembered you said it. So I'm interested in what your views are in this new season of 10 minutes of injury time. What are you seeing from that?
Yeah. Well, we had to make sure there were no fundamental effects that it was going to have on our models. And through luck, in the way that we've structured things, our primary input is looking at the over 2.5 goals in the markets, various different market sources. And from that, we can build a match XG. So because we're looking at the markets, we're not doing what you're doing. We're not doing the historical trending. We're asking the markets for this information. The markets are doing it for us. So it was not by design, but by luck. All the donkey work of the effects of injury time, fed into our models anyway. All of the player XGs, all of the match XGs. I don't have enough data yet to show if they're significantly higher this season to last season. But one thing that did absolutely trip us up was lockdown and the effect that had on match XG and corners and cards. And that was because the markets had got it wrong and we were using the markets who had got it wrong. If you bet unders on goals, corners and cards, when we came out of lockdown, well, we were still in lockdown, but they started the football games without any crowd atmosphere. Something about there being no crowds in the match saw 5, 6, 7, 8-year lows for the amount of action on the pitch. There were fewer corners, there were fewer goals, and there were a lot fewer cards. And a lot of the your odds, the requester bets, the Paddy Powers, these sort of intra-game parlays, if you were American, where you're looking at goals and corners and calls, they're all looking at overs. They're all looking at action. People love, they're all based on things to happen. And they all lost. And our model that was set up around the time to look at these worked right up until the time that we went into lockdown. And then when we came out of lockdown, we applied the same models and they went on the most horrendous losing period. And as a result, Bookie Bashing lost a significant amount of its membership base. And it's somewhere where we dropped the ball because we used the incorrect assumption that the markets were going to be right because they were applying the same XG, X cards, X corners in these empty stadiums as before. So that was a learning lesson for us because we was like, you can't just trust that the markets have got it right. In fact, unders players, and I do know some pretty sharp people got in touch with me with some betting advice, and they're like, as these games were being played in empty stadiums, they were like, you've got to get your syndicates out there, and you've just got to bet the unders everywhere, unders in everything everywhere. And I did it, and I made a small amount of money. But it was one of those things where somebody handed me the golden key. They gave me the information, and the prices were out there. And if I could turn back time, I would be doing nothing but sending teams up and down the country into William Hills onto their SSBTs and just betting under everything. But dropped the ball on that one. So.
It was an interesting period, wasn't it? And I think for a short while as well, away teams were overperforming as well alongside those markets. It was there was
something about Bundesliga, I think. Someone gave me an example of the away teams in Bundesliga where the home away benefit that you get had been completely wiped out. I remember looking at it, but I also think I remember coming to the conclusion that the sample size was insignificant because it was like 80 games or something like that. I can't remember, but I can definitely see how the fact that if you're playing at home in front of your own crowd and they're all cheering you on, it makes a difference. And those kind of things that should have been obvious with hindsight, a little bit like how, betting on the Australian PGA this weekend, perhaps we could have loaded up on all the Australian players, and then you have a look at round one and it's all the Australian players at the top, and it's so obvious after the event, but you just didn't think about it before.
Yeah, totally. Well, but I guess like the other point I would make in terms of this extra injury time, and it's following a similar trend to the World Cup, where I don't know if you recall, sort of during the group stages, there was sort of I think if I remember right, there was a lot more goals initially in the first 2 or 3 rounds, but as the tournament progressed, that sort of still ended up coming back down to the average or to the mean. I had a quick look at before I came on the chat with you. Like in the Premier League at the moment, goals in the last 10 minutes of a game are at 21%. Whereas last
now, when is the last 10 minutes of the game? Is that 80 minutes to the end to full time?
Yeah, so
or is that literally like full time minus 10 minutes?
I believe it's 81 to 90 plus. Yeah. I believe that's what I'm looking at.
So now that period of time is like 20 minutes now.
Yeah.
Whereas before it would have been 14 or something.
Indeed.
Yeah.
But what I predict here, and I think we'll see it by the end of the season, is that will return to more the long-term mean of around about 17 to 18%. Like last year was below the 15%, but 2 years back, 18% was the norm. So 18 to 21 is not a huge gap considering how much injury time we're getting. And I think teams just adapt and get used to this time, and it sort of just it will still even itself out in that period. I don't think it's sort of like go rushing in and thinking goals galore. The teams are pretty good at adapting to those sort of things over time. We're probably at the peak now, and I think we'll start to see less injury time goals, or not less necessarily, but more to the mean of where it should be.
Now, this pertains, of course, to two different edges that are applicable: pre-match, pre-kickoff edges, and in-play edges. Now, at Bookie Bashing, we just do pre-match. There's a reason for that, and that is that we don't believe at the moment in time we can get an odds feed that is fast enough to be appropriate or applicable for any in-play edges. And without the odds, it's very, very as we've discussed before, you've just got data, but you're not benchmarking against it. Anything. For me personally, I've always found in-play edges to be more profitable, to be more swingy, and I'm maybe looking at the exchange solely, and I'm trying to draft up my own expectation of what's going to happen in the game from now on, pricing something up myself, and then identifying, can I beat the market by 10, 20%? And if I can, there's always that question, why can I beat the market by 10, 20%? Is it because I'm right, or is it because I'm very wrong? Which is an important question always to ask yourself if you do find a value bet. So because at Bookie Bashing, we're just looking at pre-match, the sort of changes that happen at the end of the with injury time and everything that don't have that much effect for us. But I believe you have moved slightly away from pre-match edges into looking at in-play edges. Is there any reason for that?
I would say more than slightly. It's probably half now. For me, there's two aspects of it. I think for me, I think you can get greater returns and leverage the returns much easier in play. One way I'll be looking at that is probably doing the same analysis that you're doing and what we've talked about previously. And like, does this game, particularly in the goal markets, does this game present value pre-match? And then really what I'm looking at is like, okay, can that game get to halftime and we're not seeing any goals? And then I still believe in, if you recall, so I'm sort of talking about a model that I already think will be profitable. So I'm already reasonably confident this game should have, say, 3 goals. The price was better than I thought it should be pre-kickoff. We've got to the halfway point. The price is now much lower, or the risk is much lower. And then I'll sort of be going in to sort of target those elements. The other thing I like to target is very much the last 10, 15 minutes of the game, because it is the highest percentage window for goals to be scored. And particularly I like to focus on games where there's only 1 goal difference in it. So sort of then you're looking to sort of target 1 or 2 goals in those sort of last 10 minutes, and you can get very, very low odds. You can be going in at, laying unders at sort of 108, 109, 107. So I don't need to be right very often.
I much prefer laying at 108 than at 10.5. That's for sure. But
exactly.
To get to the last 10, 15 minutes of the game, you start off, as you say, with there should be 3 goals in this game, and then we've got decay over the game, the decay of XG. But matches will decay XG at different rates based on the caginess, essentially. There are certainly games out there where you're looking at it and go, these teams are happy with the draw. Or this team's 1 goal up and they park the bus, and it's going to be pretty much impossible for the other team to get their equalizer. And so the pre-match assumptions are almost completely out the window there, and you almost need to use a different decay rate on the expectation of what's going to happen towards the end of the match than you did have to do pre-match. And that's the kind of thing that I feel like if I'm watching the match with my own eyes, I can make my own assessment of this, but I have no idea how you would automate that on a grand scale. Do you just look at individual matches when you're doing this, or have you found a way to do it at scale?
Right, I won't give away specifically what I'm doing, but what I will say is there are a couple of statistics that are pretty common, widely available statistics that you can look at on a game-by-game basis. And I use those as a shortlist point. Now, what I'll then do, then I'm looking at price. So, like, I'm not interested in those games which look like it's end to end, or the favourites really strongly looking to add their second goal, because I have a minimum price that I want. So if it hits this price before 81 minutes, that triggers for me to get in, because it's already ticked everything else for me. But if that price is higher than I think it should be, then at that point I won't go near it. So it's quite hard to explain. Maybe some of it's intuitive. I'm not sure from watching.
Is shots on and off target one of the main attributes you would be having a look at there?
That certainly is relevant. So that what I'm referring to in terms of my initial shortlist is something that is something you can check pre-match. So it's looking at certain trends that certain teams have and where their goal distributions are, shall we say. That's not a hard and fast rule you can follow, but it certainly whittles out. It certainly gives you a much more manageable shortlist as a starting point, and then doing some other analysis on top of that. But sort of looking where at least one team, how they distribute some of their goals, and things like that, and then you're looking for those games where it's close together. I particularly like.
So you're identifying teams that have perhaps an unusual pattern of scoring late in games or not scoring late in games, either one, but they're deviating from the average. Would that be fair?
Yeah. It's that's a simplistic way of summing up, but it is one of the things I look at. But it does have some relevance for sure. A team like Wrexham would be a prime example this year, who can go 2-0 up and lose 3-2, and go 3-0 down and win 4-3. But they're probably not the best one to actually go after, because of the odds, and it's quite widely known. But I like to apply that sort of logic.
They're an enigma. The Hollywood effect on Wrexham means that it's way more people are betting on them, and so they've got way more effect on the market than anybody else in their league. So they're an unusual game, but it's the Fallon Sherrick effect as well. I mean, when Fallon Sherrick's playing any male darter, the bookmakers will find that they're taking all the money for Fallon Sherrick for two reasons. One, she'll usually be an outsider, so you got the fave long shot bias, and two, everyone wants to see the girl beat the boys, and therefore. It's when you look at any darts match with Fallon Sherrick, you've got to think that these prices are biased to the maximum. I think Wrexham have the same thing. Couple in with that, with what you just said, that they have an unusual goal distribution in the game. It's an enigma both for market makers and for punters as well.
Yeah, and look, I like to look outside of some of the major leagues as well. So, like, where I have a lot of my success, I'm looking at Brazil, Argentina, MLS, Japan, Korea, some of the Scandinavian leagues, which are traditionally more low scoring, because what you find you find it's a little bit easier finding an edge in those types of games, because certainly something like Brazil and Argentina, almost every game is priced like it's going to be unders. But if you scratch a little bit below the surface, it's a lot easier to exploit, because the market sort of. I find a lot of it if it's just a standard game, a lot of what the pre-match pricing will follow a very similar arc in terms of the price decay. It's only when you suddenly see like it's a 0-0 with 10 shots on targets for both teams that it'll start to sort of really skew. But you just ignore those games, but if you've done your profiling right beforehand, and what I like to see is sort of from the 60 to the 80 minute. Is there a general intensity increase? Shots on target are great to see, but are there more attacks? Where's the possession movements happening in that point? So is there something happening with
also those leagues are less efficient, right? So Man City versus Liverpool, £95,000 traded at Betfair, and it's Thursday lunchtime, so 48 hours before the match. Brazil Serie A tonight, Fortaleza versus Botafogo, 34,000. That's half the amount traded, but the game's in a few hours' time, so it's significantly less. And then Orlando versus Colombo versus MLS, £705 traded. So what you find in your leagues as well is that there's less liquidity, and because there's less liquidity, there's less efficiency, and then therefore you would hope that you're bringing something to the table that other people haven't, because
exactly.
You don't have to be the sharpest person in the world. You just have to be the sharpest person at the table that you're sat at in a game of poker,
Totally. And
the same with betting opportunities.
It is. And it's just learning a little bit about the leagues and the teams as well. Like MLS, for example, is a league that's strong for forward players, but quite weak for defensive players. So let's say like it's championship forwards and League One defenders. So you'll see a lot of one team goes up 2-0 and then it's 2-2 at full time. A league like Japan and Korea can look on the stats terrible, but it will come to life with a goal. And this is going to lead on to my wider point that sort of people get where I get a lot of my returns. Like I'm covering one more goal just because that will sort of get me scratched for a little bit of profit because I think it's value. But what you're looking for is whether those goals that change games. When one goal's gone in and suddenly you got 3 or 4. So I'm spreading myself across. I've got no qualms with sort of a game's 0-0 at 60 minutes, and I'm going to target 4 goals as well as 3 and 2 and 1. Yeah. And when I hit that waterfall, my returns are hundreds X compared to, and that doesn't have to happen. It'd be like when your 100-1 golfer comes in, right? You want a few places, and then boom, you get your 100-1 golfer, and that's sort of what I'm looking to do with the goal markets, right? So one pays the wages. Do you have a particular
match you're thinking of there where you're betting over 4 goals or more at 0-0 after 60 minutes? Is that an example that happened for you?
Oh, it's happened regular. I have it set up in the bot, and it's something I do on live as well. I could actually fire it up and find one from a recent game. But yeah, it happens. I'm trying to think of a game. Actually, there's one just before the international break. But we'll keep talking. I'll probably find one and give you an example.
I was desperately trying to claw into Newcastle versus Sheffield United. Where did Newcastle win 9-1 or 8-1? What was the Newcastle Sheffield United match? Newcastle Sheffield United. 8-0. But the issue was we were driving through the Worcestershire countryside, and I had to get my wife to take the wheel because I just wanted to get on and get these bets on. But as we drove in and out of reception. Every single time we came back into reception, there was another goal and the markets had reset. I was getting really annoyed by the thing because it was one of those days I wish I was sat by the computer and not on the way to christening and the other side of the countryside. Sorry,
I've got one example. I can't remember who they were playing, but it was Tigres in the Liga MX, and I think they scored to go 1-0 around about 70, and then it was 1-1 at 90, 2-1 at 92, and 2-2 at 96.
Crikey.
And like the other sort of, I guess, a hint on this is targeting goals is great, but also have a look at what markets might be linked to that. So it might be opposing the winning team, or looking at a correct score or the handicap, and then spreading across it. So you're giving yourself more outs using a poker analogy, and when the perfect out lands, you're winning across like 3 or 4 of those trades at the same time. So that's what I try and sort of do, is sort of spread that risk in the market. And I'm looking at a goal is scored, I'm walking away with a profit. But if 2 or 3 goals are scored or a perfect outcome arises, then I'm walking away with significant returns. And that's just, that happens in 1 in 4, 1 in 5, 1 in 10 games. I'm still doing very, very well.
Yeah. So you're waiting for that game where it all just comes in and it lands. I have a sort of similar pre-match strategy that if I'm looking at if I find value in a team to win an over X 0.5 goals, so if it's over 1.5 goals, then I'll tend to have found value in the over 2.5, over 3.5, and over 4.5 markets as well. And I'll just want to go for all of them. And do you know what? If it does finish with that team winning 2-0 and only the over 1.5 came in, I might have broken even. Even though I found value, I've broken even, because what I want is I want them all to come in. And so I'm it's almost a form of hedging where I could lose everything. But I'm really hoping that it ends up that over 4.5 at the end, because, as you say, the edge doesn't just, if the edge exists in one market, it very frequently exists in multiple markets as well.
Exactly. Like I often look at the agent handicap, and if that's looking good to me, I'll also look at the correct score. So I'll try and sort of pair it up so that I've got coverage in both angles. Can I ask you a question, if you don't mind, Tom? I know you do a huge amount around XG modeling, and what's your views on XG from an in-play perspective while the game's going?
Yeah, that's where these decay rates are going to be affected by the extension of injury time on both halves, for sure. It would be very easy to look at a historical distribution of matches. In fact, I say very easy. It's so easy we've done it, to look at 100,000 matches and see what the times of those goals are in those matches. And you say, okay, X percent of goals are in the first minute, second minute, third minute, fourth minute. You know how many goals you're going to expect in every minute of the game, and therefore you can take your pre-match expectation, your pre-match XG, and you just decay that as the game goes along. And that's absolutely fine, as long as you've had no other information in play. And the minute that the game kicks off, you instantly have some information. Somebody's got injured, the underdog is outperforming, things like that. And I'm certain, especially, you talk about the last 10, 15 minutes of the in play as being your edge. My edge has often been the first 10, 15 minutes of the game. And I'm going to cite a rugby example for this. I've mentioned it before in the BashCast, but there was Japan versus South Africa in the 2016 World Cup. And Japan were 200-1 pre-match. And I'm watching the first 15 minutes of the game, and they are up for it. It is not as physically dominating as the pre-match price was set at. The scrums are more competitive. Japan are really, really angry. They're fighting. South Africa look poor. They look sloppy. They look scared after 15 minutes. I can't remember if it was 0-0 after 15 minutes. It may have been, or it may have been 3-3 or something like that. But the markets didn't adjust. And that was where I got my edge. I was like, they're not 200-1 after 15 minutes. Like, they're certainly not the favorites. And I do find it slightly complicated, especially back then. I can model expected points to be scored in a match in rugby a little bit better in 2024. But even back then, I was like, it's not the same expectancy as pre-match. And the exchanges still had Japan at 200-1 after 15 minutes. And I'm just thinking, nobody's looking at this game. At least nobody's looking at the game and setting the prices on the markets. And so I took everything that I could, and it's probably a little bit of confirmation bias. You remember it because it came in. I wonder how many I don't remember, or because they didn't come in. But that was where I was like, after 15 minutes, the people on the exchanges, and also not just on the exchanges, because the exchanges are very much tied to the in-play odds offered at the bookmakers. They just had not adjusted it based on what I'm seeing. And I'm really confident that I'm seeing a Japan that is up for this game. And so for me, when I'm looking at a match, I very much consider, okay, Newcastle are even money for this. After 10, 15 minutes, do they look like an even money team? Because they're probably still around that even money area on the exchange, albeit Premiership's a little bit more efficient in play than rugby or lower divisions. So yeah, for me, using an eyes technique, using an understanding of sport, I'm thinking first 10, 15 minutes is really, really important. After that, I'd be looking at, and I've done in the past, decaying my XG and then trying to figure out if from that decayed XG, what's the probability of more goals in this game and who are going to get them? And as we mentioned previously, this season, I don't have a very, very large data set to look at the distribution of goals. I do not know how many goals to expect in the 99th minute of the match because there haven't been that many 99th minute of matches to look at. So for now, actually, I think that there's a proper edge out there for people that can do this, that are confident that they can look at small data sets and have some confidence in their expectancies, their averages, and their modeling that can come out of these very small data sets. Because nobody's got a large data set, not even the senior traders at Pinnacle, your Trenches, all the worldwide experts. Nobody really knows how many goals are scored on average in the 102nd minute of a match that has 15 minutes injury time. And because nobody knows this, that it certainly feels like to me it's an area for exploitation and edges, just not one that I've managed to be able to sort of look at it in any detail or beat yet.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, and if I may, there's a few traps when it comes to in-play XG that I wanted to sort of share with the listeners because in case they're not aware of them, because it's easy to look at those stats and see 1.4 and think, oh, this team should be 2-0 ahead, and it's not quite as sort of cut and dry as that. I'll give one example, probably showing my age here again, but if you think back to Euro 96 semi-final, Germany, that missed by Gaza, by his foreskin, I think he missed it by. That, for you or me or anyone watching the game would be an indication that the goals are coming, right? I know a goal wasn't scored, but that's a huge chance, right? That goes down as a 0 in XG. It doesn't get counted because if the person doesn't connect with the ball, it doesn't go down as a chance. So that's not even in those stats. So that's one example that can, your eyes will override what the XG is telling you. The other thing to consider, if you see a half time and it's 1-0 and the XG is what have you, check if it's been a penalty, because penalties will go down as 0.8 as an XG, whether it was scored or missed. So again, that's sort of, it could make a game look like it's going to have more goals when in reality it's probably at the point where it should be, because it was a penalty goal and that's overinflated what the actual XG is of those games. My analysis, and again, it's limited data, but I've done a fair bit of analysis on it. One goal on XG doesn't really equate to one expected goal. The average for a goal being scored is actually around about 0.6 to 0.7 from the data that I've seen. So really, if you're looking at something that's I don't know, it's 1.5 at half time and it's 0-0. Actually, you're probably looking at that thinking there should have been 2 goals in this game. So again, that's something that's worth sort of keeping in mind. And it's very hard, right? Because XG, it only really shows when a goal's actually been scored, and the art in it is trying to predict when that goal's going to be scored, right? So, I'm starting to look at games where I want to sort of see one team being sort of 1.5 ahead but not got that goal yet. So that's indicating to me that there's one team that's dominating. That's what I'm going to focus on. And we probably should have had 2 goals by now. That's sort of one of the areas I'm looking at. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I'd sort of mention in here. Penalties, disallowed goals. If it's been a VAR goal, and that's particularly relevant to today, that will go down as a 0, same as a disallowed goal. So, so missed chances, i.e. what they call, I think it's not connected, or not a non-connection opportunity doesn't count. Disallowed goals don't count. VAR don't count. Whether they should be or not is open to debate. But so I just be mindful.
I mean, you've got to feel like it's amazing that VAR doesn't count, because it's almost like that was a goal before VAR. So it does have some relevancy to the match.
So so I would treat it as a trend, and it is useful to have in your arsenal alongside whatever else it is that you're using. But it's not something that I would use in isolation. So I thought it was just sort of sharing that experience.
But this sort of ties into sort of the different strategies of doing it, because of course we come up with pre-match XG from which we can then decay during the in-play if we want to. Whereas I think you're looking here talking about data sources that give you the XG in the during the match. And
exactly,
I don't know. I mean, I know Flash scores, who scored. There's a variety that do it.
Others,
But if you can do that yourself, and that's it's a difficult thing to do because a lot goes into it. But some really good gamblers can use their own eyes and sort of convert how they're seeing the game into an expectation of how many goals should have been scored and could have been scored, can be scored from now to the end of the match based on that. But it's definitely not an easy thing for sure.
No, it's not. But in effect, that's what as traders, that's what we're doing. If we're watching a game and trying to trade it, you're instinctively doing that, and now you've got a name for it. But I think it's a case of like, if you've got that ability and you're able to watch closely and you have that awareness, you can use the XG that's being published plus your own knowledge, and that is where you might find the actual edge in the game rather than just going solely by the XG stats.
Yeah, for sure. But it's an interesting one. It's just like it's a confidence in being able to do it yourself. And this brings me on to a question that you and me are going to have biased answers to this, because you and me own data services that we make available for people to have. Something I had interesting on Twitter recently is a few people came up to me and they were a little bit angry at me because I was, if
Twitter,
you like,
angry?
selling.
Really?
Yeah, they were certainly not happy. I don't know if they were angry, but they were not happy with me. And the reason they were not happy with me is somebody said, most of us manage to find our own edges, keep them secret, and we don't feel the need to show off and sell them to a group of people. Now, I saw that and I was like, I don't see what I do like that. I see what I do as the aggregation of data with some in-house modeling applied to that data. And then if anybody wants to gain access to what I've got historical results that prove that there is positive return on investment for it. And I don't use 99% of the modeling that goes through bookie bashing because there's so much of it. So it's not like this would go to waste if I didn't do it. And also it's a capitalist society. It's supply and demand. I've got something to supply. There is demand for it. So, Mr. Annoyed can be annoyed and say that he never uses the services and I shouldn't sell one. I don't necessarily agree with him. I am biased because I do it. You also do it through Predictology. Do you think our services, Predictology and bookie bashing, are for everyone or for a select group of people? Or do you think most people, if they're advanced enough, can run with the ball without using something like what you have and what I have?
I think that's a great question. And I would say I've had similar conversations, but I think this is also the nature of Twitter and also the nature of, let's say, that we operate in an industry where it's very hard to shine at something good because there's so much bad stuff that's put out there, and it tarnishes everybody as a whole. So it's very hard to, there's healthy skepticism, and sometimes that skepticism goes beyond that. I understand it, but sometimes it's like, you've decided before you've actually looked, but that's okay.
Exactly, and there's this presumption that if one thing's bad, everything's bad, but there's no bunk beds in the graveyard.
Look, very much like you. I mean, we provide a wealth of tools, models, insights. Me taking a value bet. I'm in Manila. Me taking a value bet at what is effectively 1 a.m. does not stop you from finding a value bet at 11 a.m. in the UK. We might, how we use that data, how we apply it, the advantages that we find will probably be different for almost everybody using it. I'd love to say that Predictology is for everyone, and I've tried to sort of create something that is quite broad based in that, it should have something that appeals to most people. But the reality is that there's probably 3 types of people that do succeed and continue with us for a long time. They are the ones that, one, will come in, they have an interest to learn, they want to develop their own approach, become self-sufficient in what they're doing. So they'll ask a lot of good questions. They'll take what we provide, but then they'll adapt that to their own uses, whether that be their risk profile, where their bank management side, their interest levels, et cetera, and and so many of them come back to me and they're doing fantastically well, and that's because they've sort of created something within what we provided for them, and that's working very well for them. And somebody else may have a slightly different approach, and that's working really well for them. The other sort of profiles of people we come in who are people who are very much interested in automation, but again, they share a lot of characteristics with that first group. But they're very much, again, very keen to sort of, they take responsibility over what they're trying to do, and they're taking ownership of that. They're using the tools that we've got, they're using the technology and integration, and they'll develop it out from there. And they're patient, they have a long-term view, and all of those sort of smart characteristics. And the third patch I find, which are quite interesting, and I'm seeing more and more of, is those more traditional advantage play / value bettors who are losing accounts, and they're coming with an interest and a thirst for knowledge for trading, because they feel that that's the closest pillar to move across to give them some long-term sustainability while they continue where they can in terms of the advantage play. So it's those are sort of 3 that I'd love to say.
For sure.
Everybody,
it's very much a natural progression. If you don't have shops and you've lost your soft bookmakers and brokers and international is not an option, then exchanges is what you're left with. So I can definitely see that. And I kind of agree with you. For a service like bookie bashing, we try and have a broad range of content so that it can be attractive for those that just want to cherry pick a few value bets. But honestly, those that want to ask questions, and there's no such thing as a stupid question. So anyone that doesn't ask a question, that's the stupid question, the fact that you didn't ask it. Those that want to interrogate and analyze themselves do tend to get the best out of something like bookie bashing, something like Predictology. I'd say generally we have one type of person that we are not for, and it's the kind of person that needs the money to pay their rent next month, or is a more of a low staking £1, £2 accumulator, and they've put half of their bankroll into a monthly subscription because they think that they're going to get these guaranteed profits. In fact, we've sort of identified some of these people in the past and said, you can have your money back because we're not.
Yeah, that's very fair. Yeah.
So people want to find your site. What's the website address, John?
It's predictology.co. So basically .com without the M.
Yeah, www.predictology.co. Cool. So on website address theme, I'm going to finish the BashCast conversation with you with a Christmas quiz. Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you the top 10 visited websites as of, it says on this article, October 2023, so last month, in the world. If you get 7 or more, you win the Christmas quiz. If you get 10, I'll send you a prize. And if you get less than 5, you're going to have to send me £1,000, okay?
Oh, jeez, okay.
So the top 10 visited websites in the world. I want to just give you a little hint. I've removed a Russian one and a Chinese one that you would never get. So other than those two, they're all very understandable. So it's like technically it's 10 of the top 12, but it's the English language facing ones. Okay.
All right. Well, as a long-term bettor, I'm gonna play it safe and conserve my bankroll as best as possible. So I'm gonna go for some obvious hitters, and hopefully I get to that 5 before I have a few more.
Okay, here we go. Yeah.
YouTube
is number 2.
Okay. Facebook must be up there. Facebook
is number 3.
Google.com
is number 1. So you got the big 3 there.
Yeah, I told you I was playing it safe, right? My first curveball, I'm gonna say, because it's coming up to Black Friday, Amazon.com.
There's number 10. Snuck in there.
Okay. Actually, Facebook split theirs out. So if we've had Facebook, got to be Instagram in there as well, hasn't there?
Is number 4.
Its numbers are smaller than I always expect, but I'm going to throw in Twitter as another obvious one.
There's number 5. You've got the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
I'll save my money.
Can you get the last 4 though? Is the question.
Oh, I'm going to struggle with that. Are there any curveballs in there? Can you give me a clue?
Yeah, one of them I wouldn't consider to be a website because it's more frequently used as an app, and I wouldn't have thought of it as a website.
Okay.
That's the curveball you're getting there.
Is Reddit in there?
Reddit's not in there, but I have done this quiz to people in the past, to my friends, and Reddit was in it there. So had I asked you this a few months ago, you would have been right, but not this month, I'm afraid.
All right. Wikipedia
is number 6.
Oh, okay.
So you've got 3 left: 7, 8, and 9.
Ooh, you got me now. Let me see. What's the most popular newspaper? That's not going to be there.
No newspapers. I'll give you a hint there. You've got another search engine. That was too easy, wasn't it? That was too much of a clue. Yahoo. That was too much of a clue.
Yeah, you did help me out there. Oh, man. What's the most popular travel website? Booking.com?
Not Booking.com. I'm going to put you out of your misery, okay?
Go on then. Yeah.
I don't think you would have got it because I don't consider it as a website. Number 8, WhatsApp. But
I said the Facebook thing as well, didn't I? Yeah, but yeah, I was right. I didn't think of it as a website either. Yeah, okay.
And number 9, a website I personally have never heard of. I don't know about you, John. X videos. Who knows what that could be about? Maybe I'll go and visit that one day.
I'll have to check that out after this call.
Jon Roberts, thank you very much for joining us in the BashCast today. It's been fantastic talking to you.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for having us on, Tom. I really enjoyed it.
Gambling and chat. Gambling and chat. Gambling.